Good morning, I'm Taylor Wilson, and today is Friday, August 15th, 2025. This is USA Today's The Excerpt. Today, ahead of Trump and Putin's meeting, we discuss why Alaska. Plus, the Supreme Court declines to block a state law limiting kids' use of social media for now, and California's governor announces a special election to redraw maps. President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin are set to meet later today in Alaska. They'll come together at Joint Base Elmendorf-Richardson, thousands of miles from both the White House and the Kremlin, and on land that once belonged to Russia. So why does Alaska make sense for the eyebrow-raising meeting? I spoke with USA Today national correspondent Trevor Hughes to learn more. Trevor, thanks for hopping on, sir.
Absolutely. Glad to be here.
So just starting with this, Trevor, tell us a bit about the military base where Trump and Putin will be meeting.
So it's known as J-Bear for those of us who've been to Alaska, and I've been there many, many times in the course of reporting for USA Today. It is just a giant base on the edge of Anchorage. The military has a huge presence in Alaska, ironically, because they do so much patrolling of the coasts and the air for Russian planes and ships.
And Alaska as a whole really is preparing to play an increasing role on the world stage, as you write, Trevor. How so?
Well, Alaska has always been a place where we've found gold and oil, and those are hugely important to the economy. But increasingly, there are thoughts that perhaps there are rare earth minerals that could be in Alaska, and if not in Alaska, in other polar regions. And as ice melts, what we're seeing is more and more ships traveling through that area, both for exploration and simply because it's a faster way to get between Asia and Europe. People in Alaska see their state as playing an important role in that economy.
You know, Trevor, the International Criminal Court issued an arrest warrant for President Putin after indicting him for war crimes. Why then is Alaska a safe space for him?
Well, Alaska is not Europe, for starters. And the thing is, Alaska and Russia are actually just mainlands 55 miles apart. You really can see Russia from people's houses in Alaska. There's a place where there are two islands, American and Russian, that are like 3 miles apart. So Putin can actually leave Moscow and fly east from there, but end up in Alaska without having to overfly anything but Russia and the United States.
That's a good point. What's some of the history behind Alaska being used as a stopover for diplomatic missions? I know it's kind of unique geography has put it in a similar role before, right?
Yeah, so it's easy to forget because we all look at maps that are flat, but we live on a globe. And when you look at a Great Circle route, Anchorage is actually within convenient distance of a lot of East Coast American cities, but also Asia. And so it has long been a refueling stop. So the Pope has been through there. The Emperor of Japan has been through there. And so US presidents have met a number of times with sort of counterparts and colleagues on the tarmac in Alaska, just like President Trump is doing.
Trevor, can you tell us a bit about the Russians and Ukrainians who live in Alaska, or maybe some of the influences from those cultures? I find that to be kind of an interesting subtext to this meeting as well.
It's easy to forget, but Alaska used to be part of Russia. We bought it in a purchase called Seward's Folly because who would want this frozen wasteland? And then they almost immediately discovered gold and oil, and we can see how it worked out. So there are some pretty close ties between Alaska and Russia. The Russian Orthodox Church actually has a number of operating churches in Alaska to this day. People still go to services. And that's because of that long history of connection between the two countries. Because we here in the lower 48 tend to look at Russia as a long way away and in Europe, on the other side of Europe. But it really is just next door for the people who live in Alaska. And then there are hundreds of Ukrainians who call Alaska home. Many of them sort of came to the country after Russia invaded their home country. They moved to Alaska under humanitarian programs or refugee resettlement programs. They're farmers, they're working in construction, and they're taking up those very Alaska pursuits, hunting and fishing.
Well, as for Alaskan pursuits, Trevor, I mean, this really is the kind of time of year to visit Alaska, right?
You know, the sun doesn't set until 10 p.m. You can work a full day and go for a hike after work. Or if you're President Trump and you like to golf, you could actually golf at a golf course on this military base. You just have to watch out for some unusual hazards. There are sand traps, there are water hazards, as you might expect, but there are also bears and moose that wander onto the course periodically.
All right, all eyes on Alaska today. Trevor Hughes is a national correspondent with USA Today. Thanks, Trevor.
You bet.
Be sure to tune in tomorrow morning to The Excerpt for our full recap of Trump and Putin's meeting. California Governor Gavin Newsom announced yesterday that his state would hold a special election on November 4th to ask voters to approve a mid-decade redistricting plan. Newsom made the announcement after criticizing President Trump and Texas Republicans for intending to redraw that state's congressional map ahead of the 2026 elections to create more Republican-leaning congressional districts. Redistricting efforts are also ongoing in Florida and Ohio that could benefit Republicans, and other states are also discussing redistricting. Those efforts could yield Republicans 9 or more additional seats to bolster their House 219 to 212 majority ahead of an election that may favor the Democrats as Trump's approval rating sags. I spoke more about that on yesterday's August 14th episode of The Excerpt with our government accountability reporter, Aaron Mansfield. You can check out that conversation with a link in today's show notes. Earlier this month, First Lady Melania Trump threatened to sue Hunter Biden, the son of former President Joe Biden, for more than $1 billion if he doesn't retract the claim that she was introduced to her husband by convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. But that hasn't stopped the scandal-ridden younger Biden, who was pardoned by his father after pleading guilty to tax violations and was convicted on firearms-related charges. Yesterday, he hit back with an expletive-laden response, saying he had read the account in newspaper articles dating back to 2019. Speaking with the YouTube show Channel 5 with Andrew Callahan. Melania Trump, who married President Trump in 2005, described the claim as false, disparaging, defamatory, and inflammatory. Trump's legal notice was first reported by Fox News. You can read more with a link in today's show notes. The Supreme Court yesterday declined to block, for now, a state law imposing age verification and parental consent requirements on social media sites. I spoke with USA Today Supreme Court correspondent Maureen Grappi for more. Maureen, thanks for hopping on.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So let's start with some of the background in this case. How did it land on the High Court's lap?
Well, NetChoice, which represents Facebook, Instagram, Reddit, X, YouTube, and other social media sites, they're challenging Mississippi's law, and they argue that because they're likely to win their case that the law is unconstitutional, that the law should not be allowed to go into effect during the litigation. A federal district judge agreed with NetChoice, but an appeals court reversed that decision and said the law could be enforced in the meantime. So that prompted NetChoice to ask the Supreme Court to put the law back on hold.
Well, as for the Supreme Court, what did justices decide yesterday, Maureen?
Well, they rejected that request from NetChoice, which means that the law can be enforced for now.
And any explanation here? Did they explain their decision?
They did not, which is common for decisions they make in response to emergency appeals like this. We did hear from one of the justices. Brett Kavanaugh wrote a few paragraphs of explanation. He said that the law probably is unconstitutional, but that NetChoice had not met the high bar for the Supreme Court's intervention at this stage of the litigation.
And in terms of the involved players, what have we heard from Mississippi's attorneys or those representing the social media companies?
Mississippi's attorneys say that the law is a targeted effort to regulate social media platforms that let predators interact with children, and it does not violate the First Amendment. NetChoice, on the other hand, says the law forces both adults as well as minors in Mississippi to surrender personal information to access online speech that's protected by the First Amendment. And they called the Supreme Court's decision just a, quote, unfortunate procedural delay before they predict that the law will eventually be struck down.
Well, Maureen, you mentioned Justice Brett Kavanaugh. Seems like he kind of kept the door open here. What's next? Where do you see this going?
Well, now we wait for the lower courts to fully consider the legality of the law before it comes back to the Supreme Court. And when it does, just because one justice, Kavanaugh, said he thinks that the law is unconstitutional, we don't know if a majority of his colleagues will agree with him or if Kavanaugh himself will stick with that opinion once they've heard all the arguments, which is what comes next.
All right. Maureen Grappi covers the Supreme Court for USA Today. Thank you, Maureen.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to The Excerpt. We're produced by Shannon Ray Green and Kelly Monahan, and our executive producer is Laura Beatty. You can get the podcast wherever you get your audio, and as always, you can email us at podcasts@usatoday.com. I'm Taylor Wilson. I'll be back tomorrow with more of The Excerpt from USA Today.